Zamlang as the sample. This is Malacca, history of Malacca, connected with Ming Dynasty. This is the charter from the Zheng voyage map. I researched Malacca. Malacca now maybe is a very important historical Zheng city in Southeast Asia. I found this is a map very important. You can look at here. Missing two generals, two chinos. I found this name, location, the name of location. This is the Malacca map, this area. Our museum located at this area. It means our museum was built on the original site of the General Chinese building in the year 1750s. This is the French map. So we try to look for where is Zheng warehouse. 官场 means warehouse and basement for Zheng. In Malacca, there's also the religion Zheng in this temple named the Sanbao Temple. This is before the year 1981, there's a state Zheng Sanbao Gong status now stolen by someone. Yeah, this is Mazu and Zheng in religion Zheng in our museum was kept in the original Zheng Chinese General building in the original site was kept very well. We researched the year of this status around the 1660s. This was kept in our museum, Mazu and Zheng, Guanyin and Mazu, Zheng's treasure ship. As same as the original historical resource in China Beijing Library. Same. This pattern was kept in our museum. Okay, I introduce another city, Samlang in Indonesia, in Central Java province. I name it Religion Zheng City. Every year in June, 30 of June, local Chinese society will hold the Zheng Festival. And this is all a Zheng Festival every year, maybe around at least more than 200 or 300 years. And I found the historical resource from one French historical resource to record this ceremony. Last November, Zheng Festival was listed by Indonesia Culture Ministry to be the intangible of Indonesia. It's very important. It means religion Zheng. I write the article to introduce religion Zheng, and also I find a lot of Chinese historical resource in Samlang was kept very well. In Indonesia, in Samlang, also there's another Zheng named Dampu Awang Zheng. Dampu Awang is a local story of Indonesian people. In Indonesia, name it Dampu Awang. Also, I find a historical resource in Samlang. In Indonesia, also the local Chinese pray in front of this tomb. The local Muslim pray behind. It means one religion Zheng was believed in not only by Chinese society but also the Muslim society. This is Samlang. The killing, Chinese killing, and the graph also connected with Zheng. And another city is Cirebon, unlimited legend Zheng city. The local king, Sudan. In the historical resource in Cirebon was written in the year 1720s. Indonesia Culture Ministry published books about Zheng story. In the local Chinese temple, also record the story of Zheng, and named this city is legend Zheng city. In the Kelaton, in the palace of the Cirebon, they kept the ceramic. They named it Zheng ceramic. And also in the king tomb of king, also kept so many Chinese collections. This is the research about the Zheng and the Southeast Islam. Also, this is World Heritage led by China, Maritime Secret Heritage. It's a program led by China. I introduce quickly. I invite Cirebon, this batik from Cirebon, to join this program. I promote Semarang, also Zheng city joins this program this year. And Zheng tourism led by Indonesia Tourism Ministry. I try to promote Zheng Sambal to be UNESCO World Heritage, Cultural Heritage in the future. And I try to research Zheng Sambal Cultural Heritage. This is the concept of the heritage. And I try to invite more research, more museum, and also more cities join this program, not only from China, but also Malacca and Indonesia cities together. Try to Zheng Sambal as the UNESCO World Heritage. Okay, this is my projection. Heritage brings peace, especially if we research Zheng can promote the peace. Okay, thank you.
Hello? It's on, yeah? Great. Okay, so I'm Felipe Ferreira. My interest in basically Zheng started way back in 1991, so I am quite old, and recently retired from my position as assistant lecturer with HKU in the African Studies Department, which gives you a hint that the reason I'm looking at the Western Indian Ocean is because I'm originally from Kenya, and from the city of Mombasa, which is just south of the final port on the African coast for Zhenghe's voyages, which is the port of Malindi. And so my previous work, which our previous speaker knows about, was published by the Zhenghe, or the Zhenghe Museum in Malacca in 2010, and was looking at one portion of the Mao Kun map, as it was called, which is the portion that I've outlined in blue. So the Mao Kun map, as most of you saw yesterday, is a cartogram. It's a long, thin piece of scroll with different parts of a journey. So it's not a map, it's a journey, and therefore it's a chart. And in the original Chinese translation, it is called a chart. It is the Europeans who first looked at it that called it a map. It's not a map, it's a naval chart. And this is the last part of the chart. So the bit highlighted in blue there is the coast of East Africa. The island right at the end is Sri Lanka, and that's the tip of India. And then India goes all along the top of this cartograph. And then here we have Sumatra in the middle as an island. And then we have this bit here and this bit here, which is Hormuz. So this is the bit that I'm looking at currently. The investigations on that first bit over there have already been published. But my methodology is pretty much the same, but I'm going to rush through this to give you some idea of how this works. Now, I worked for quite some years, 7 years, in the oil industry in the Middle East, where I was also looking into the story of Zheng. And I borrowed an idea from geophysically geophysical modeling. Now, in geophysical modeling, as you go down in the Earth's crust, you're going back in time. But what they do is they take slithers of those layers of rock and they map them. Now, each of those layers of rock is like a time capsule. It could show where the sea was in the past. It could even show where forests were in the past. And to prove that they're on the right track, they put a borehole down, and that's like an archaeological record. So this is the model. The further back down you go, the further in past you go. And I apply this to maps. So this is the map you just looked at. This is it blown up, and this is the Mills version of the map. And here is how he has translated some of the places on the map. Now, I immediately noticed that the map doesn't look like your current maps of that region. And so let's see what we can do. We can look at maps that were produced later, like these Portuguese maps. And I particularly chose one Portuguese map, which was in my investigations at the Qatar National Museum, one of the oldest Portuguese maps of this region. It's by an unknown Portuguese cartographer, but covers this area, and I reckon it's around 1520 that it was produced. Now, working on the place names, the toponyms that are on this map, they provide me with, if you like, the rock surface above. Zheng He's journeys are below. Then I need to look at what comes below Zheng He's journey. And to do that, I look at linguistics. So 3 different languages, Persian, Urdu, and Arabic, are the languages in this area. And I align what's identified by Mills on the map with what occurs with the Portuguese, so that's the later ones, and the original versions in indigenous languages. Now, these indigenous words too can change over time. So I have to take that into account by looking at archaeological sources. And I divided it into the northern shore, which you see here, which is mainly Persia, or in the modern states, Iran and Pakistan, and the lower portion, which is the Arabian Peninsula, and mainly Oman. This is that same map we were looking at, but as a mosaic from satellite photographs. And now it kind of starts to make sense that you've got this shoreline on the top, which is the Pakistan-Iran bit, and then that shoreline right at the end, which is Oman, but then we're back to Iran at the bottom. So it's kind of a bit peculiar in the way it's set up, almost as if somebody taped together bits of it to make it fit this cartograph. And as I explored further, I realized that I could actually divide it up into an actual map, which is of Hormuz, and then a coastline that circles all the way around, and then that bit in the middle, which is the Arabian Peninsula and Oman. And I compared it with local archaeology. This was a little bit of a task, because much of the archaeology that's been done in Iran is not accessible. Some of it has not been released by the Iranian government. Other parts of it have been only in Farsi, so I couldn't access it. But on the other side, on the Omani side, in the last 20 years particularly, there's been a lot of work with German and Omani organizations. And what they actually suggest is there are a number of places that were mentioned on the chart there where there is a chronology, including Chinese ceramics, but Chinese ceramics at the time of Zheng He's voyage, the early Ming period, are actually very low. The Ming ceramics increase after that period, which suggests that the big flow of Ming ceramics came with Portuguese vessels rather than with the Chinese trading vessels. Now, we have to remember that Zheng He's voyages were not trading voyages, they were tributary voyages, they were state voyages. So the ceramics arriving with them were gifts, they were not to trade. And the states didn't trade things back to China, they gave them as tribute. So it's not a trading mechanism we're looking at. And then if I actually map these out on a modern map, what we've actually got is two long charts. And both of the charts are actually coastal charts. And again, we kind of think, well, we're led to believe that these voyages are transoceanic, and they are, in part. But in this particular portion of the Zheng He map, what we're really seeing is two local coastal routes. Now, in this process of identifying places, I identified 3 places that Mills didn't identify or misidentified. But they actually are spread out in such a way that they help in this coastal voyage. Because if you look at Jask, it's just where the coast changes direction. If you look at Sohar, it's again where the coast changes direction. But then you have 2 parts, that bit at the entrance to the Straits of Hormuz, and this bit at the bottom, near Muscat, where there are a lot of settlements. And that's because both of these areas were politically tied together at that time. So how does this then unroll? Well, I racked my brains about this, and I remember working at the Royal Geographical Society and looking at hidden histories of exploration. And so I went back to London this year, and I found this chart. Now, this is a coastal chart developed by Gujarati traders and drawn by Gujarati traders. It's a 19th century map or chart. It's very similar in its structure to the Zheng He's chart. It's a cartograph. It's long and thin. It's of the Red Sea. Socotra is down here. Aden, if you excuse me, is that there where that flag is. And then it goes all the way to Mecca. And there's another clue. Because why are these charts Muslim charts, even though it's in Gujarati? It's because the predominant sailors of the Indian Ocean at that time were Islamic. And we know that Zheng He himself was Muslim. And we also know that there were other Muslims like Marwan on his voyages. So we have this Muslim world, thank you, and we also have Zheng He's presence in it. But it was discovering this particular chart that led me to think, what exactly is going on here? Because some of the names of the places in this chart that I investigated are direct translations from local Islamic languages. And when I worked on the East African chart, I found the name of a place that Mills couldn't find, and it was actually Jazira el Sela, which literally means in Arabic, Sela Island, today's Lamu Island. So what I'm beginning to see now is that there was an indigenous production of charts which over time have virtually disappeared. There's this one in the RGS, there are 9 in Delhi, and they're all produced in the Indian Ocean, and they're all coastal charts. So my theory is that the Zheng He map is a chart. It's also a chart that's composed of 2 linear coastal charts and one of a map of an island of Hormuz. The chart structure follows an ancient Asian tradition. Ancient, I mean pre-European, of linear sailing charts. And it's very likely that the proto-charts of the Mahpum chart were of Persian, Arab, or Indian origin, and therefore they represent a knowledge transfer between the Islamic world of the Western Indian Ocean and China. So we're talking about communication and knowledge transfer. And in terms of comparison with Mill's work, the coast of the United Arab Emirates does exist on the original chart, but not on the Mill's version. So everybody's looking at the Mill's version, especially people from the West, because it's translated into English. But it's full of errors. And the errors get worse and worse the further west you go in the chart. And 3 locations that were identified by me that weren't identified by Mills. I would also say that the map would appear to have been produced after the 1417-1419 voyage and before the 1432-33 voyage, which is also in agreement with Mills. And this final folio of the Maokun map would appear to depict the coastal regions that were under the sway of the Sultanate of Hormuz. And this is why they include those particular localities in Oman. So the archaeology and the ceramics meet with the linguistics and meet with this method of examining the map. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the welcome, and thank you for the opportunity, despite tropical typhoons coming to thwart our conference. Well, just a few words of explanation. This was supposed to be a joint presentation between Paul van Dijk, as I'm sure many of you know, a Professor Emeritus of the Sun Yat-sen University, and myself. We have for a while been working on the biography of the Hong merchant Chongqua, because he is quite an interesting character with very different narratives compared, if you compare the different stories of different countries. So in the first half, Paul would have told about his study of both European and Chinese sources. I'll do my best to run quickly through that before we get to the second half, which is sort of the Danish part of it, where Chongqua has left a completely different legacy. So first of all, these Hong merchants of Canton, of Guangzhou, were, as you know, extremely important in the global trade in the 18th century and early 19th century, as is our topic here today. But first, Paul has done some wonderful research in actually finding out who Chongqua was, one of the famous Hong merchants. Let's see. Yes, we'll just skip these two, since we are. Well, Chongqua in the environment of the Hong merchants of Guangzhou was in some ways a stranger, because, as you know, most of the Hong merchants were actually from the Guangdong or the Fujian province, but Paul figured out that Chongqua actually came from the Anhui province in the far north near Shanghai, and thus spoke a comparatively very good Mandarin, but was not very popular among the other Hong merchants. He also kept his links to the north. His eldest son became a Mandarin in Beijing. His other son became a Mandarin in Nanjing, and later in Beijing. So he was definitely quite a different character compared to many of the other Hong merchants with their important links to the tea plantations in the Fujian province. And he had many connections with various Qing dynasty officials. So Chongqua was in the sources called the man from beyond the Yangtze River, and as you can see, several portraits of him existed since we are so far up in time. In his early career as a Hong merchant, he traded mainly with the Americans in the last years of the 18th century, and if you look at the American sources describing Chongqua, as Paul has done, well, the picture is not very positive. He's called a rogue, he's called do nothing with him, he's suspected of roguery. They were not very fond of Chongqua, called a bad character, a great scoundrel, and so forth. So an interesting narrative from the new American traders here on the river. But later on, he went on to trade primarily with the British East India Company in the early decades of the 19th century. He apparently did not speak any English, so his brother Chikwa did all the correspondence with the British East India Company. And when you examine the records of the East India Company, like Paul did, well, you get sort of a picture similar to what the American sources say. He's a principal mover in every mischief. He is very well connected with the Mandarins further north. He's responsible for the failures of other Hong merchants, but is joined in 1813 by his eldest son, who left Beijing to join his father, eventually taking over his position. So in general, in the British sources, he's called untrustworthy. Good tea in his trade is replaced with bad tea. So I'm sure Paul here would have said that this is a wonderful example of if you use the British sources and the American sources, as many have done previously, you get one image of a character, of a person like Chungwa, but as I will show in a minute, well, as soon as you broaden the scope, well, other narratives starts to appear, highlighting how important it is to use a diversity of sources. And one of the interesting aspects happened in the great fire of the European factories outside Canton in November 1822, where a disaster struck and most of the factories burned down, and everyone scrambled to save their tea and their silver and more. Because here, in the aftermath of the fire, we see that especially the Dutch needed help to get their factory rebuilt, and had troubles finding financial support and Chinese support in order to rebuild the factory and resume the trade that was about to be organized by a new Dutch trading organization. But Chungwa was actually the only Hong merchant willing to help the Dutch build a new factory, although he needed quite a bit of convincing. Nonetheless, Chungwa invested about $30,000 of his own money to rebuild the Dutch factory. So, from a Dutch perspective, a different narrative about Chungwa, but and now we get into my part of the research, where I'll slow down a little. When we study Chungwa from a Danish point of view, from the Danish sources of the old Danish Asiatic Company, we get a very different narrative. So I'd like to begin my part on a morning on the 6th of October 1822, when a boat sailed from the Pearl River from Ampoa, heading towards Chungwa's house outside Canton. On this boat were the captains of the Danish ship Kronprinsessen, the supercargoes, and various other high-level officials. They carried a box on board this boat, and inside the box was a portrait of the Danish King Frederick VI, as well as a letter from the directors of the Danish Asiatic Company, thanking Chungwa for his great service to their company. Inside the box was also a rather large sum of money, the money that was being owed to Chungwa after he had taken care of the Danish factory. But this was well received by Chungwa, who in return, after the exchange of gifts later on, Chungwa had a new painting created and sent this painting along with a scepter down here, a traditional symbol of luck and longevity, and also 2 boxes of tea and a letter to the directors of the Danish Asiatic Company. This picture and this scepter is still preserved at the National Museum in Copenhagen, where I live. I just had the pleasure of actually examining the scepter the week before I left. As it was a gift to the Danish royal house, I was very careful with it, because it might be just the scepter that ensured the longevity of the royal house. So I was very, very careful, and now it's back in the exhibition. Chongqua wrote a letter to the directors of the Danish Asiatic Company, which is also preserved in the collections of the National Museum. It was likely written in Mandarin and translated into English in Canton, and that English letter, along with the Danish translation, is preserved at my museum archive. And here we can actually hear Chongqua himself speak, or at least his scribe, and he uses a wonderful flowering language. My chief desire is that your honorable nation may enjoy interminable happiness, and the people and every living creature enjoy peace and plenty. I also desire that the company's trade may daily increase and monthly be renewed. These, my prayers and wishes, I send tens of thousands of miles. I'm sure these very beautiful wordings must have made quite an impression once the letter got back to Copenhagen. So, clearly, pure harmony between Chongqua and the Danish Asiatic Company, but how did this happen? Well, during the Napoleonic Wars, Copenhagen was attacked by the British in 1807, which bombarded the capital and seized the Danish Norwegian Navy, which was relatively large in the period. Most of the ships of the Danish Asiatic Company was taken at sea, and others became part of the new struggling Danish Navy trying to rebuild. And that meant that shipping between Denmark and Asia came to a halt, and not until 1819, so that is 12 years after the British attack, did a Danish ship reach Canton again. And the directors of the Danish Asiatic Company were rightly quite worried, because what about the tea left in the Danish factory? What about the debts? Much of the Danish China trade was sort of a rolling venture where debts were taken, tea was bought, and then the money sort of transferred between continents, used to pay again. So a lot of debts were there. But once they finally arrived in Canton again after 12 years, Chongqua had proved a most valuable friend. He looked after the tea in the Danish factory. I'm not sure the taste would be that good anymore after those many years, but at least he kept after the tea, and he was kind enough to actually relinquish some of his claims of interest of the loans that were still running after these many years. So that was what led to this friendly relation, and to Chongqua's gift being preserved first in the king's private collection in Copenhagen, where it was for about 30 years, and later in the 1850s they were given from the royal collections to the National Museum in Denmark, where they have now been exhibited for decades. But there are also other sources, other Danish sources, that tell about the friendship between the Asiatic Company and Chongqua. For instance, the very young assistant in the Danish Asiatic Company, Theodor Emil Ludvigsen, wrote a wonderful diary of his time as one of the last traders of the Danish Asiatic Company, and he describes lavish feasts at Chongqua's house, as well as his humor, that he had a wonderful wits. And he also mentioned how, well, as Europeans, the Danes were not actually allowed inside the Canton city walls, but nonetheless, Chongqua arranged for palanquins, these covered carried chairs, where the Danish merchants and captains were smuggled into Canton to participate in his feasts. So quite another story. Another similar example is the last Danish supercargo, Richard Bentley, of an old British family, who also traded and participated in feasts at Chongqua's house. Unfortunately, he didn't leave any diaries behind, so we don't know exactly how he felt about that. But another, some time ago, I made another interesting discovery at the Royal Library in Copenhagen. He did leave a notebook behind, which he called Venskabsminde, Memories of Friendship. And here, inside this notebook, he kept naughty poems from his friends. He had a lock of his loved one's hair, and he also had a drawing of one of the ships he was sailing on. But beside these quite wonderful sources to the daily lives of the supercargos, well, we also find a memory of Zheng. The book consisted of a lot of papers with sort of the golden edge, and from the construction of the notebook, I can sort of deduce that due to the design, it's most likely that Bentley took a page from his friendship book, and I went to Zheng and asked for him to leave a memory, just like his Danish friends had written their naughty poems. Then he asked Zheng to leave a memory after spending time together in China. And Zheng, or perhaps one of his assistants, agreed and painted these wonderful flowers, I believe it is, and also his seal, both in Chinese seal script and in Latin letters as well. So thus, Zheng's flowers and seal is still preserved, but did he paint it? Did he make it himself? Well, that's a good question, but it's still a wonderful memory. So Paul and I would like to give the last words of our presentations about Zheng to himself from another quote from his letter to the DAC directors, which is quite astonishing, I think, because here he really details the ideals of good merchants that he clearly knew. The interesting question is, of course, did he live up to them? Perhaps sometimes. But in his letter, he sort of sketches these ideals, and here he is in the exhibition of the Chinese exhibition at the National Museum of Copenhagen. And Zheng writes, "And whatever monies and goods may be sent by the company for my house to finance, I shall be careful in every instance to charge a fair price and transact the concerns justly and equitably. I shall not on any account plot the acquisition of unjust gains and deceive my own heart, nor cause harm to the commerce of the company, whose correct proceedings shall be eternal." Quite a beautiful quote, I think. Whether he lived up to it is an open question, but at least we know now that his phrasing of the ideals of the trade, and well, finally, to conclude, well, just a wonderful example, I think, of how different the narratives we can create from various sources. So, as I'm sure Paul would have said, let's include as many sources as possible to get a well-rounded narrative. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My topic, just now Professor Fong told you about, is about three metals that was very popular Chinese exports during the 18th and 19th century, and Baktong, Tutenak, and pewter. Well, three words are really difficult to pronounce, and even it's really difficult to find clues in the archives or historical material. And now I'm from Jinan University in Guangzhou. Okay, this is the outline of my talk, and I have four parts. And the first one is to talk about the research background, and the second part is about the historical sources and very important scholars that have some kind of researches on these three metals. And the third part is I will give you some examples and historical sources on this Chinese export metals, and finally is the conclusions. Okay, the research background. Okay, well, in the field of Chinese exports, commodities such as the porcelain, silks, and tea have received widely attention. But research on metals and its artifacts left behind requires systematic reviews and in-depth studies. And you can take a look at the images in our museum. I think last year there is an exhibition on the Chinese export silver, and that is kind of Chinese export metals, but my focus on different kinds of metals. And the first very important literature is from the Lewis, and in his book, and this book is very famous, and he talked about the metals play a crucial role in Chinese foreign trade. It is no exaggerations and to say that the early phases for China's foreign trade was almost entirely dominated by the metal trade. Okay, the metal trade, in my opinion, is just for silver and gold trade, but there was no Paktung trade or some other kinds of a trade. But that is, yeah, he mentioned that not only porcelain and silk and tea, but some kind of other trades would have some kind of needs to be researched. And the other thing is about my professor Van Dyke, and he got lots of books on the Canton trades. And in some of his books, he have some kind of a list on different cargoes, products. Okay, so you can see there is a tin, or sometimes we call it pewter, and there's a turtleneck. Okay, we can translate into it. It's a bai qian, or in Cantonese we always call it bai yuan. Okay, and you can see this is one of the table that mention a very famous home merchant, Pan Qiguan, and in one of his trade with the West, and he had some kind of tea trade and the tuna trade, and in the 18th century. Okay, and finally I summarize kind of a previous research, which was written by Professor Van Dyke in his book. And most of the things were focused on the company, research on the company and commodities and different geography, regions and literature, culture, etc. But there was nearly nothing, okay, about the what I talk about is a Paktung trade or tea trade, and there is another thing is about the clarification of the term China exports, which was from Patrick Connor, dating back to the 2070s. He mentioned that the term originally referred to decorated iron objects and exported from China. It was not the contemporary usage, but a concept constructed by the later scholars. So that is what I want to mention, and the Chinese export method is among this group. Okay, so, and my research we focus on the archives, and we give you some images about the objects. Okay, so this one is Paktung. Okay, and this is from a spoon, but this is not Paktung. Okay, you can see the spelling is a Pakfeng. I told you why, because in the early period, the European cannot pronounce it right, so they pronounce it in a different spelling. Okay, so you can take a look at the images. The upper images are the Chinese style Paktung. Okay, in the lower period, in the lower images, they are the Europeans artifacts. So what is the Paktung? Well, actually, the Paktung is the nickel-bearing copper alloy, and they have different forms like the copper nickel and copper nickel and zinc, and that is the chemical compositions. And its production lines is very popular during the Ming and Qing dynasty, but not in the period of the Zheng period. I have no idea why, but there are a few artifacts that were made before Ming and Qing dynasty, but there was really few examples. And the value of property, and because of its physical and chemical resistant to the air and water, so that is why it's very popular for the European manufacturers. Okay, and there is a story that told about the European metal workers would like to make imitation of a Paktung. So they try really hard to make this kind of metals. But finally, Swedish scientists recognized that in China there is a different alloy procedures to make the metal. That is Paktung. It is from a story which was told by the International Nickel Company. So just now we talk about we know that there is a Swedish scientist. So we take a look at it in the I think in the mid of 18th century. Okay, in in a journal that was published in Sweden, and in Swedish, there is a very famous chemist wrote a paper, report about Pak Tong. But you can take a look at the images. He called it Pak Fong. Okay, that is what that is a kind of error spelling, but from the inside, we will know that there is a man called Mr. Blach, and he brought some Pak Tong from China and introduced to Sweden to different scientists. And this is the Peter John Brand. He was from the SOIC, Swedish Insulin Company, and he brought lots of Pak Tong sample to different Swedish scientists to make experiments and to do something different at the time. Okay, and this is another archive which was preserved by Mr. Black, and he recorded that the Pak Tong was found in Canton, and there is a different producing procedures for making. For example, you can combine the red copper with zinc and tuntinago, and the second one is to combine the white copper with the red copper and zinc. That is recorded by Mr. Black. Okay, and even in Britain, the society, the Royal Society at London, just have a kind of prize for imitating Pak Tong, and they have a lot of interest in. And famous scientists, English scientists like Huygens and Somers, have conduct experiments to know how to make this reproduction for the British version. Okay, and then and even when so you can see that there is a very famous person called James Watt who made a steamed engine, and he had some kind of discussion with William Moore and even some famous Darwins and Wedgwood, and they have discussion to talk about the Pak Tong, and they have the connection with this famous Matthew Bolton, but this is another story. I just want to mention that a lot of connection with the West and Pak Tong. And the second thing is Tuntinac. That is why I talk about Tuntinac, because Tuntinac is one part of the Pak Tong, and even in lots of shipwreck, you will find lots of ingots from the shipwreck. Okay, for example, last year, and Michael Flecker have a preliminary reports on the shipwreck. He mentioned Tuntinac, and Tuntinac is actually we cannot be equal to zinc, but it is a kind of raw zinc, or we call it spelter. Okay. And actually, as a matter of fact, as early as the early 20th century, and there was people from China and from Europe. They have done lots of researches on Tuntinac and Pak Tong. That is my book published 10 years ago. I talk about Pak Tong, but I have some kind of a discussion on the Tuntinac in my book. Okay, and then we can take a look at this discovery that was found by Michael Flecker and some kind of scholars. They found that every shipwreck might have the Tuntinac ingots, and they have scientific experiments on its chemical compositions, and they have done some archival research, and then I find out there was a very early, also this Swedish journal. There was I think the Swedish Indian company guys that have wrote about his knowledge on Tuntinac. Okay, so and I have done some researches on the name of ridges and the letter and the places for ridges. Yeah, because the time is running now off, and so I need to skip this. Okay, and even when we talk about the commercial between China and the West, we always we always cite is John Robert Morrison's guidebook, and he has some kind of a report on the turtleneck. Okay, and even when I have some kind of a in-depth research, I found this very important person. He have really detailed records on turtleneck. Okay, so this is the turtleneck. Okay, and the last thing is the pewter or the tea. Okay, you can see that that is the ingot from one of the shipwrecks in Southeast Asia. And this is a kind of European lecturer frequently misidentify turtleneck as tea. So lots of errors among the tea trades and the name denominations. So etc. That is why I choose this very difficult part to be my focus. Okay, so that is. So you will see when every time you enter a museum, you will find a turtleneck or pewter or tea in the museum, like a tea box. Inside there is a pewter box, tea canister, and even you will find that in 10 years ago when I was at Liverpool Museum, there was tea figures. Even in the Chinese export painting, they have the pewter shop, a tea shop. Okay, when we paid a visit to different museums, like the Slanger Museum, I found lots of artifacts which was produced in China and exported to Malaya. Okay, so this is my research. Okay, not only for the purpose of economy commodities of the metals, but also for different perspective of research. For example, the technologies and the cultural concepts, etc. We have lots of things could be done on the metals. Okay, so this is my next step and to further my research. For example, the archive and test-driven verbalizations, the construction standard forms, etc. And very interesting is that when you have dipped into the researches on the catalog of the 19th century, and you will find a lot of Chinese export metals like silverware, okay? And then I use the technology and use the details introduction about the technology. I use the AIGC technology to reproduce, okay, the appearance of different metals, okay? So this is a thing that I would do in the future. Okay, so thank you so much. So and that is a great special appreciation to Professor Van Dyke and to Zheng. Okay, thank you so much.